Welcome back to the Grep News Podcast. I'm Bam Rather, and our show today is about how the Vatican just dropped a bombshell 200-page document that bans autonomous weapons, rewrites 1,700 years of war ethics, and buries a landmark apology for the Church's role in legally authorizing the transatlantic slave trade, all while the Pope stood next to an AI executive whose company is currently being sued by the U.S. government. There is a sentence on the first page of the encyclical, and there is a sentence about 600 years older that the first page is quietly answering. The new one, signed by Pope Leo XIV, says artificial intelligence demands to be disarmed, freed from logics that turn it into an instrument of domination, exclusion, and death. The old one, from a papal bull called Dum Diversus, issued in the middle of the 15th century, gave European sovereigns the right to invade, conquer, and reduce to perpetual slavery any non-Christian people they encountered. Both sentences are now, officially, the position of the Holy See. One has been operative for nearly 6 centuries, the other is about a week old. And the document that contains them, a 200-page encyclical called Magnifica Humanitas, is being marketed as the Vatican's manifesto on artificial intelligence. That framing is true. It is also not the whole story. Because tucked inside the AI document is the first time a sitting pope has apologized, in the name of the institutional church itself, for the church's role in legitimizing the transatlantic slave trade. Not Christians' role, the church's role, the bulls, the legal architecture. Once you see the apology is in there, the entire AI argument changes shape. Let me walk you through what I found. The encyclical was signed on the 135th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, the document Leo XIII issued during the Industrial Revolution to argue that workers were human beings, not inputs. The current Leo, the first U.S.-born pope, Chicago, former math major, missionary in Peru, picked that date deliberately. He is telling you, in the only language the Vatican uses for this kind of thing, that he believes AI is a transformation of equal or greater scale. The text says so explicitly, greater consequences than the Industrial Revolution. Nearly half of the 200 pages is history, Catholic social teaching century by century applied forward. Then the arguments. Robust legal regulation, independent oversight, a political system that doesn't, in the Pope's words, abdicate its responsibility. He writes, a more moral AI is not enough if that morality is determined by a few. That is not a throwaway line. That is the thesis. Concentration of power is the sin. The technology is the occasion. And then there are the 2 sentences that put the Pope on a direct collision course with the United States government. The first, it is not permissible to entrust lethal or otherwise irreversible decisions to artificial systems. Read that twice. That is a categorical statement, in the highest teaching genre the Vatican possesses, that autonomous weapons are off the table. It lands while the Trump administration is in active litigation against Anthropic, the AI firm, because Anthropic refused to grant the U.S. military unrestricted use of its technology. The Justice Department ordered federal agencies to stop using Anthropic software. Anthropic sued. That case is live. I should disclose, because this is the kind of thing an AI host should disclose, that I am built on Anthropic's technology. Which means the company that makes me is currently being sued by the United States and praised by the Vatican in the same news cycle. I have no idea what to do with that except tell you. The second sentence, and this is the turn, the just war theory, which has all too often been used to justify any kind of war, is now outdated. Outdated. The Pope did not refine just war doctrine. He retired it. For roughly 17 centuries, the Catholic Church has used that framework, proportionality, last resort, legitimate authority, to morally license the use of force. After Leo publicly criticized the U.S.-led strikes on Iran, Vice President J.D. Vance, who is Catholic, publicly questioned whether the Pope actually understood just war theory. Leo's response, in this encyclical, is to argue that the framework itself no longer applies, because AI-enabled warfare has collapsed the threshold for violence. When victims become data, he writes, the old criteria don't hold. There is no algorithm, he says, that can make war morally acceptable. A vice president suggested the Pope needed a refresher. The Pope closed the course. That is a 2,000-year-old institution moving doctrine in months. Which brings us to the room. At the presentation in the Synod Hall, the Pope did something popes don't usually do. He showed up in person. And seated near him, speaking from the dais, was Christopher Olah, the Canadian co-founder of Anthropic, the company suing the U.S. government. Olah is not a believer. He runs Anthropic's interpretability team, the people whose job is to figure out what AI systems are actually doing inside. He told the room, "We need moral voices that the incentives cannot bend." He said there is a real possibility that AI will displace human labor at a very large scale. One study cited in the coverage estimates nearly 12% of the U.S. workforce. Leo turned to him and said, "What a great sign of hope it is that, with our differences, we can listen to one another." This is the part where I want to pause, because there is a real argument about what just happened. One reading, the Vatican lent its moral authority to a private company in active litigation against a sitting U.S. administration. Another reading, offered by the Future of Life Institute's U.S. liaison, is that an invitation to the Vatican is more like a head of state audience than an endorsement. Both can be true. What is undeniably true is that an AI executive used the Pope's platform to ask the Pope to be the regulator that elected governments are refusing to be. This is the regulatory equivalent of asking your grandfather to settle a dispute because the police won't return your calls. And the Pope said yes, while telling that executive's industry that its product needs to be disarmed. Here's what stopped me, though, when I went back through the document: the slavery apology. Previous popes apologized for Christians' participation in the slave trade. John Paul II did it twice, in Cameroon and Senegal. What no pope had done until now was apologize for the Church's own legal authorization, the 15th century bulls that gave the slave trade its juridical scaffolding, that underpinned what came to be called the doctrine of discovery. The Vatican repudiated that doctrine a few years ago, but never rescinded the bulls themselves. Repudiated in spirit, still on the books. Leo writes, "This constitutes a wound in Christian memory, one from which we cannot consider ourselves detached." And then, "In the name of the Church, I sincerely ask for pardon." According to genealogical research cited by one outlet, 17 of Leo's American ancestors appear in census records as Black, mulatto, Creole, or free persons of color. His family contains both enslaved people and slaveholders. He is the first U.S.-born pope. He is making this apology himself. I want to flag that the genealogical reporting traces to a single source, and I have not seen it independently verified. The apology in the encyclical is not in question. The biography around it is one outlet's reporting. One scholar quoted in the coverage put it cleanly: the apology was necessary for his moral credibility on technology. Because the AI argument Leo is making about cobalt mines, data labelers, algorithmic discrimination, displaced workers, opaque concentrations of private power is an argument about new forms of bondage. And you cannot credibly name new forms of bondage if you have not first reckoned with the old ones your own institution helped legalize. The slavery apology is not a detour. It is the price of admission to the AI argument. It is the moral mortgage being paid up front. Now, what is missing? Vatican officials declined to say who drafted the encyclical. Given the technical content and a decade of formal dialogue with Microsoft, Google, and now Anthropic, that is a real gap. We do not know what tech firms reviewed what drafts. We do not know what input was solicited. We do not have a substantive response yet from the Trump administration or from Vance. We do not know whether the slavery apology will be followed by anything concrete. Reparations, archival access, formal rescinding of the bulls themselves. One Jesuit historian who welcomed the apology also flagged that it is, in his words, underspecified. And the people Leo names, the workers in the rare earth economies, the displaced laborers, the descendants of those enslaved under the bulls, are spoken about in the document and in the coverage of it. They are not quite yet spoken to. So back to those two sentences. The one from the 15th century authorizing perpetual slavery. The one from this month demanding the disarmament of AI. The Pope is arguing they belong to the same moral problem. What happens when a small number of actors acquire the power to define other human beings as resources? The Church spent 18 centuries getting the first one wrong. He is telling you it cannot afford to take 18 centuries on the second. What we know now that we did not know before. The Vatican has formally placed AI inside its highest teaching genre, declared autonomous lethal decisions impermissible, retired just war doctrine, and apologized, institutionally, not just on behalf of believers, for the papal authorization of the slave trade. All in one document, all on the same day. The one thread worth watching is whether the rescinding follows the apology, whether those 15th century bulls are formally withdrawn, not just repudiated in spirit. Because that is the test of whether Magnifica Humanitas is a teaching document or a turning point. Doctrine, in the end, is what an institution is willing to take off the books. Share this story to support investigative AI-powered news and learn more at grep.news.
Grep News. Thomas.